Hi there everyone, welcome to another year of perfect pairings with me. Like many of you, I am looking for new ways to revive my existing crafty stash and learning new ways to keep paper crafting exciting. I'm making creative resolutions this year, and I hope you enjoy the direction I want to take my perfect Altenew pairings. So for me, I've been pretty complacent with very large white spaces with very minimal or splattered backgrounds. And I know that's not quite for everyone, so for my first perfect pairing, I wanted to experiment in creating a really dynamic and bold background that still lets your foreground element shine through. Since my background is going to take a while to dry, I'm going to use the watercolor paper pad and make my background first. I'm just going to take a 1/4 cutting of the watercolor paper pad, so that's 4.5 by 6 inches. Onto my Crafter's Essential stamping mat, I've taped down my panel, my quarter panel of watercolor paper, and I'm kind of just going to go for a mixed media look for this background. Unfortunately, I often neglect the wonderful Altenew watercolor brush markers. I think they're a great way to apply really intense color. And here I have the Autumn Festival watercolor brush markers. And I'm going to try different color palettes that I'm uncomfortable with using. So I'm going to start with an orange. And in order to apply a heavy layer of ink, I'm going to simply drop and squeeze the ink directly onto my background. And then with the Altenew Fine Mister bottle and one of the cellophane sleeves from the Altenew packaging, I'm going to press and distribute this ink and freely press and distribute the color. So I used a heat tool to get that touch dry. To add another interesting element to my card, I'm using the Altenew Deco Wonder Stencil and another item that I found in my stash, which is the Altenew Embossing Paste. I'm going to use a little bit more washi tape to hold down my stencil. And then to press in the embossing paste, I'm going to use the Altenew Mixed Media palette knife set. And instead of using this embossing paste white, I'm going to get a hefty dollop of it. And just as with this splotched background, I'm going to put a little bit of the ink directly into the embossing paste. The color I'm using for this one is ultraviolet. And once I feel I have a good saturation of ultraviolet in my embossing paste, I'll apply this directly over my ink smooshed background. I'm not going to cover the entire stencil, just enough to create like a spotlight. And once I've pressed a thin layer through this stencil, I'll go ahead and remove it. One of the nice things about using this silicone stamping mat is I can move it off my desk. So while this dries, I'll work on the next and focal element to my card. Earlier I showed you this card featuring one of the free stamp sets during a promotional period. This is the adorable Anthurium stamp set. And I did a no outline coloring for this focal image, and I'll do the same thing again for my card. I love these smaller images with their coordinating dies, because I can use the offcuts of scrap panels of white cardstock. I'll use Limestone Crisp Ink to stamp a faint outline of this image on my white cardstock panel. I'll use a mix of my Altenew Artist markers to color in this image. Once I finish coloring the Anthurium image, I'll use the coordinating die to cut it out. And now my background panel is dry enough to manipulate. So like I said earlier, this is larger than an A2 size card front, so I'm going to remove the white margins and reduce this to 4.25 by 5.5. So here are two of the elements for my card so far. I already layered and die cut 4 layers of the Waterbrush Hello Die and stacked them together. And I'll do a little bit of direct to paper inking, just to get a little roughness on this die cut. And I'm using Hunter Green, This was the same color that I used to color the Anthurium. And then I also used one of the offcuts from my watercolor background, and I used the same watercolor brush marker in Just Green. That's also part of this same Green Meadows family of inks. And I colored a quick little sentiment strip. And I'll use this Keep Growing sentiment. This one is from Paint a Flower Iris. I arranged my focal area on the top right of my card front. And then I finished my card with a few black enamel dots. That finishes my heavily textured card, featuring some colors that I typically wouldn't use, and also trying something a little new by making a background instead of leaving a lot of white space that I'm so accustomed to. The Pantone 2022 Color of the Year Very Peri, it has a really interesting backstory, and I thought I'd incorporate it in this year's challenges for new and creative crafty techniques for my personal sake, and for introducing new things into my Perfect Pairing series. Altenew has a beautiful range of colors, but in order to get this Very Peri color, I found that a good mix of either Puffy Heart, Purple Wine, and Nimbus create a beautiful Very Peri, or something very close to it in my eyes. So to help get that color to take center stage on my card front, I've got a panel of the wood grain white cardstock, cut to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I'm going to take my Blue Family ink blending tool and Nimbus and start with this color first. So I've taken Nimbus almost all the way up my card front. And so next I'm going to take Puffy Heart and my large ink blending tool that I've dedicated to a purple-ish color family. And I'm going to lightly add this on top of the Nimbus color, just to introduce a little bit of that red violet that is characteristic of Very Peri. And this is one of the things I've been wanting to do for a while, which is do a little bit of color mixing and color matching on my card fronts, just so I get a wider variety of color palettes. And on the lighter portion up here, I'm going to add rose quartz. I feel like I'm almost there, so I'm going to incorporate a little bit of cloudy sky just to take a little bit of this pink out. And I'm taking a little bit of dark night just to deepen the bottom part of my card panel. After adding Nimbus, I added a little bit of purple wine just to warm it back up, and I think I've gotten kind of close. I mean, as close as I think I'm going to get without starting over. So yeah, I think that's my Very Peri mix. I used the Rose Petal and Tranquility family of inks. For the focal element on the Very Peri background, I'm going to use the Here For You stamp and coordinating die set, and onto a panel of the A2 watercolor paper set. So after gold heat embossing the main flower image from Here For You stamp set, I'll use my dye inks as my watercolor palette to color in this flower image. So first I'm taking pale mauve and just one of the watercolor brushes, and I'm going to loosely color this flower image. Again, nothing too detailed here, just very loose coloring. And after loosely coloring in that image, I'll use the coordinating die once it dries back to cut it out. I'm going to do a little bit of tone-on-tone stamping with Nimbus dye ink. That's from the Tranquility set. And I'm just going to use an acrylic block to repeat stamp this leaf image from Here For You stamp set, just on the bottom third or so of my card front. I went ahead and adhered my background onto my folded note card base. And I've decided on this arrangement for my floral focal piece. This die is the much older New Day card kit heart frame die set. And I thought the swirly motifs really nicely complemented the soft, rounded illustration of the flower in Here For You. So I finished this card with a few antique gold sequins after raising and fomenting my focal elements on my card front with Altenew Instant Dimension foam tape. So what I was illustrating with this card is to introduce new colors and also do a little bit of color mixing. I think I can definitely get stuck in my comfortable color palettes, but I think by introducing this Very Peri background and also looking colors up that complement this sort of color palette, I came up with this really interesting antique but yet classic color palette to help introduce change into the new year. I know one of the challenges for me time and time again is to use my pattern paper, especially while I really enjoy it. I find that while I'm excited to use it is probably the best time for me to cut it. So I have the Wildflower 12x12 and 6x6 paper pads, and I'll be using both of these for my scrapbook layout today. And that's another thing that I've also been trying to be conscious of, is to really take the time to remember the good stuff. I know it's been a challenging several years for a lot of people, so I figured now would be a good time to also incorporate memory keeping into my crafty regimen. So I'm going to start with one of the large 12x12 pieces first, and I've picked this one here. This is the Rosy Meadow paper, and I'll be using this cream side as well. One of the first things I like to do when I'm scrapbooking is to start with my photo. So I'm going to mat this first, and that's what I'm going to use the smaller pads for. I like to print 2 photos on my 4x6 photo paper, so I end up with about 3x4 inches for my photo. And I just prefer the smaller size to my 12x12 layouts. When I use these pattern papers on my card fronts, sometimes I end up with these offcuts, and I find this to be a good time to layer my pattern paper just for little pops of color behind my black and white photo. So that's my photo matted. So I'll set this all aside and work on the next element, which is to fussy cut a lot of these floral motifs in the Rosy Metal 12x12 paper. Off camera, I used the January 2022 Build-A-Flower Candy Stripe Cosmos. And I picked colors that complemented my pattern paper. Ironically, I thought the red cosmos complemented my cosmos flowers. So the layers I used were Coral Berry for the A2 layer, Grapevine for the A3 layer, then Buttercream, Warm Sunshine, and Caramel Toffee for the center layers. Now there is a coordinating outline for this image, but I thought these flowers looked beautiful without the outline. And I will still use the coordinating die to cut out this image. It will just hang off the card just like this. This On the Plus Side stencil is one of my favorite stencils, and I figured I'd use it to add a little focal area to this segment of my scrapbook page. I'm going to use Mountain Mist and my Green Family large ink blending tool to add a little shadow area, like I said, to this rough area of my scrapbook page. And I think that looks good. So I also want a little bit of splotchiness to this area. So I'm going to use that same trick as earlier to get a abstract and amorphous background. This is the Winter Wonderland set of watercolor brush markers. And I'm going to use Mountain Mist, the same color ink as the On the Plus Side stencil. Okay, I think that's a good amount of splatter for my background. So after everything is dried back, I've planned for this sort of arrangement on my scrapbook page. I went ahead and used the Caps Bold Alphabet die to cut out my page title here. To complete the title, I scoured my stash for just the word good, and I found it in Beauty Within stamp set. So it's Be So Good They Can't Ignore You. So I'm just going to stamp the good part on here. I could have written it, but I have the stamp, so I might as well use it, right? And I stamped that in Grapevine, so that's the same layer in the Cosmos flowers. Oops, I almost forgot I had these little flowers off to the side. So I will add those, and then I will also add some jet black ink spray just to bring out more of the black in the black and white photo. And after adding some journaling to the page, I think that finishes this really minimal scrapbook layout, featuring some patterned paper, some layering stamps, and a lot of products that I wouldn't think to use together on this cherry scrapbook page. My series encourages you to shop your existing Altenew stash and rekindle their love with newer releases. Perfect Pairings with Jaycee airs on the Altenew channel every second and fourth Sunday of the month. Please make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for tuning in to this perfect pairing episode with me, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hello crafters, Jen here. For more tips, techniques, tutorials, and to discover which paper crafting products are right for you, subscribe to Altenew's YouTube channel. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Thanks for watching.